Welcome to Classical Ideas. This is Greg Soden. So I have a lot to say about the experience of doing the Classical Ideas podcast and putting out the best show that I've been able to do over the past 3 or so years, and I have been reflecting a lot lately. I started this podcast in the middle of 2017 because I love to ask questions. Asking is what I've mostly done. Sitting in the interviewer seat has always given me the liberty to shield myself from divulging too much because I am basically always the one asking the follow-up questions and the initial questions to begin with, and asking my guests to go deeper on any particular topic we may be discussing. I have asked a lot of questions to a lot of amazing people over the past several years. And over the course of more than 150 episodes, I have learned from Baha'is, Sikhs, Buddhists, Christians, Muslims, Jews, novelists, journalists, Pulitzer Prize winners, professors, teachers, parents, clergy, witches, Satanists, yoga teachers, my former students, musicians, and other fantastic everyday people who spent time with me to have a conversation about building bridges in our world. These guests have also gone on to become actual friends. I have hung out in Chicago, Illinois, Niagara Falls, New York, Whidbey Island, Washington, Cleveland, Ohio, and Lawrence, Kansas, and St. Catharines, Ontario, with past guests. And I have had guests over to my houses in Columbia, Missouri, and Buffalo, New York. So I started this show out of a spare bedroom and a classroom in the middle of Missouri with no audience to speak of, and my religious studies teaching mentor was my first guest. To date, this modest show has been downloaded more than 150,000 times all over the world. It's been played over 12,000 hours on YouTube, and it appeared as a weekly show for a year and a half on a radio station directly following Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman. So this show isn't perfect. There's a lot of folks out there who are better at this than I am, but this is an amazing and completely intrinsic creative accomplishment to me, and I am so proud of this creative endeavor that I started with a few $60 USB microphones that I'm still using, that I'm recording this introduction on, my original microphones, GarageBand, Skype, and a MacBook. I thought I'd make maybe a few dozen of these until I moved on to something else. I don't have any sponsors, budget, editing team, producers, research team, or any kind of assistance whatsoever. I do all the booking, scheduling, reading, outlining, interviewing, editing, publishing, and my Patreon account receives around $40 per month, 20 of which goes to my internet server on Libsyn. So I did a little math earlier, and I've realized I make about 50 cents an hour to make this show. And I do it because that is an extremely enjoyable and rewarding 50 cents an hour. I don't know how many more episodes I will make, but I do know that I'm not done yet. I sincerely hope that if you're listening to this, you'll consider checking out my back catalog of work. There are so many that I'm proud of. And if you want some suggestions, just shoot me a message on Twitter at classical_ideas, and I will custom tailor a playlist exactly to what you want to listen to. So since I've begun this show, podcasters and media folks have been constant sources of inspiration to me. I communicate with other hosts on Twitter and Patreon often. I've loved following the shows Keeping It 101 with Dr. Megan Goodwin and Dr. Elise Morgenstein First. I've loved Religion for Breakfast with Andrew Mark Henry, the Religious Studies Project podcast, Dr. Jackson Crawford's YouTube channel, Spirited with Dr. Simranjeet Singh, Mind Pop with Dr. David Sahat, Dr. Marshall Poe, and the New Books Network's amazing array of shows. Other ones like Weird Religion is amazing. Myths and Legends, Ex-Evangelical, Straight White American Jesus with Dr. Bradley Onishi, Dr. Daniel White Hodge in Profane Faith. Another off-the-wall one that you may not have heard of is Catastrophic Break with Consensus Reality by Chris Hanna. And another one, which is called Find the Good News with Oran Parker. So these are all great shows. Many remain under the radar as niche shows just like mine, and we dwell in our little carved-out universes in the internet. So let's linger on Find the Good News for a moment, because this is a special dual-published episode where I was interviewed for Find the Good News podcast when Oran Parker, the host, reached out to me about appearing on his show as a guest. We had such a great conversation. I had so much fun. And we talked about everything from teaching to music to my quasi-obsessions with Haruki Murakami and Leo Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Ilyich. I was feeling particularly chatty, and we had a ton of fun. So I asked Oran if I could put it out on the same day as him, and he said yes. So we both recorded unique introductions, though, and as of recording this, I haven't heard his introduction. So Find the Good News is a show that aims to change our tendency to dive headfirst into bad news by focusing on good people doing good works, and I'm honored that he sees me in that way. Oran talks with artists, educators, civic and spiritual leaders, musicians, business owners, students, volunteers, and other everyday citizens who are using creativity, resources, and talent to bring hope and happiness to their corners of the world. As Oran says on his show, there's a lot of news in this world, and he seeks to find the good, which I find to be an amazing reason to live. You can follow Oran's show at findthegood.news online, or as Find the Good News wherever you get podcasts. So because of this additive mindset that Oran has, I was delighted that he invited me to chat with him. In this conversation, where he's interviewing me, we discuss so many things, which I hope you'll enjoy listening to. I certainly enjoyed having the conversation as well. So the title of this episode is Clunky Oars, and you will find out why. So this episode is a winding road, and thank you so much for joining me listening to the Classical Ideas podcast at any time. And thanks for listening to Oran Parker of Find the Good News podcast interviewing me about my experiences making the Classical Ideas podcast. It is truly an honor. I hope you enjoy the conversation.
I started realizing I wasn't bringing my audience as it was growing. I realized I was going to kind of hit some fences, with my local guests. And I was like, I really need to start reaching out to people, further than Southwest Louisiana, down here at the mouth of the Gulf, so.
That's awesome. Well, and what's so crazy is my show started local too.
Yeah.
And I don't have to tell you all about it. If you want to ask about it later on, that's fine. But my first 20-something guests were all in Columbus, Missouri.
Yeah.
And so then I branched out after that because I sort of hit that same exact thing where I was like, what else how can I take this to another level,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you've really done a great job, man. I love your show. I kind of stumbled upon your show whenever I was listening to a podcast called Interfaith Voices. I don't know if you listened to that.
Yes, I've listened to several. I know that Tahil Sharma has been on it, and he was on my show, and I love his work, yeah.
Yeah, so that show kind of led me to yours, actually by accident. Because y'all's title cards are similar, and I was looking through different podcasts one day, and I clicked it thinking it was that one, and then yours started playing. I said, I clicked the wrong thing. I was like, well, wait a second, what is this show? That's how it goes. This is a great show.
I'm so glad to hear that. It's like the weirdest hobby ever because I find this show to be so much fun to do. But I also feel like I never really get feedback on it. So it's really awesome to kind of hear when it does actually resonate because nobody ever writes to me and says, "Oh, this episode was awesome," or "This episode was terrible." Like, I never hear anything, so I feel like I'm just putting these things out into a void a lot of the time. And most of my listeners are super busy, like professors and stuff.
Sure.
So like they don't have the time to give me like detailed feedback. But it's nice to hear that it actually is getting listened to sometimes, because I'm like, do people actually listen to it? It's one of those things.
No, I hear you, man. I go through the same thing. I mean, you can look at your numbers, but that's just so sterilized. There's no personality. You don't know if it's affecting somebody's life. Like, I will be honest, listening to your show and other shows like it, and I'm sure you're the same way, you learn these things that you can carry with you into your day-to-day. And I do find myself bringing up things I learn on your show, but I may not necessarily always reference your show. So you're not going to see that kind of feedback, And so I get what you mean. I wonder the same thing, is anybody... Now, I do get messages, and I'm sure you get some too. I get those messages from folks, and usually the person who takes the time to communicate, those people are going to really give you like this sort of robust communication. Oh, this episode really hit my heart, or it changed my life, or it gave me a new outlook, whatever it may be. Those people who do that they're rare, but they're valuable. They keep you going.
Absolutely. And I mean, I have thought about stopping so many times.
Really?
Oh, yeah. And right now, like I used to put out 6 episodes a month.
Yeah.
And right now I'm in a period where I'm only allowing myself to do 2 per month because I am so busy at work. And I'm a dad and stuff, and I've got a dog with cancer, and so there's so many things happening right now. So it's like right now I'm just trying to keep the show from dying.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I kind of went through that too. Now your show's been out a lot longer than mine. I'm only on the other side of my first year, but I was kind of doing that too. I had this goal of I was going to put it out every Wednesday, at the same time, and I stuck to that for the first year. But what I realized, because I like you, I have a job, and then I have a family, and I have all these other things that I have to be involved in. And I thought, keeping a weekly show, well, first of all, it's a long show. I mean, most of my local shows, they could be 2 hours or more.
Yeah.
People can't keep up with that, especially if you're not their favorite podcast.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. And like, what will happen is like, so the thing that I would like to know is if somebody downloads it, do they actually play it? Do you know what I mean? Like, I would almost rather get my play statistics instead of my download statistics in a lot of ways, because like it doesn't really matter to me if somebody downloads the episode but never hits play on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because I noticed that's interesting you brought that up. I only just recently kind of realized what was going on, because I noticed my iPhone storage was full, and I was like, what is eating up all my storage? Well, I looked, and all these different podcast apps are just automatically downloading these episodes.
Yep.
And so that data is kind of skewed.
Yeah, exactly. Just because you get a download doesn't mean you get a play.
Exactly. Now, I do put it on SoundCloud, and I can see only plays on SoundCloud, but those are a lot thinner than the host, or these other aggregators, I guess would be the way to put it. I don't know. I'm still learning. I mean, every week I think I find some little new piece of information. It's I heard somebody describe it as the Wild West of communication. I was like, that's a good description.
I think you may have heard that on do you listen to New Books Network at all?
No, but I will. I'll check it out.
Okay, New Books Network, the head of it's this amazing academic book podcast network where there is a book channel about almost any topic in academia that you can think of.
Really?
So there's like new books in Buddhism, new books in environmental studies, new books in political science, new books in medicine.
Wow.
And it's got like 50 different channels. And I think that the creator of that network actually said something like that in several interviews. So that may be something that you're thinking of.
Yeah, maybe so. It's one of those weird pass the baton pieces of lexicon that sort of emerges, and you hear it and then somebody else says it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well, man, this is fun. Yeah. And it's nice. I'm glad we jumped right in, because my show your show's nice and clean. You have a nice, clean intro, and I love that. My show kind of wandered into this habit of just jumping right in the conversation and getting going. So that's kind of how I do my show. I just like kind of fade right into the conversation, and I've heard people say they like it, so I just haven't broke that format.
That is totally cool with me. I have no problem with that whatsoever.
Well, since we did jump right in, if you don't mind, I'm going to pull a page from your book and ask you to introduce yourself and give the folks listening. I even feel like I need an introduction, because I really, in all fairness, I haven't listened to every single episode of your show. I'm still pecking my way backwards. You have so much good content that what will happen is I'll begin working backwards, but then a new one will come out and I'll jump back to the new one. Like right now I'm in the middle of your most recent episode. So there's just so much I probably don't know about you, because you slowly reveal things about yourself as you interview people.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, my name is Greg Soden, and I am a teacher first and foremost, and a parent, but I also have this amazing hobby of podcasting. And so I've been a teacher since, I guess I started doing all like the student teaching and field experiences that teachers have to do starting in like 2003, 2004. And I graduated with a teaching degree from the University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri. And I always, from a young age, like absolutely loved travel and adventures. And so while most of my teaching graduate colleagues were looking for jobs on the I-70 corridor in Missouri, like between Kansas City, Columbia, and St. Louis, I went to an international teaching job fair, found a job teaching in Mexico, and then from Mexico, I went to the suburbs of London in the UK, taught there, and then I did a master's in education at the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon, Canada, before moving back to Missouri to pursue a PhD at the University of Missouri in education. Dropped out of the PhD program after 2 years and some publications under my belt in favor of having a slightly more balanced life as a 10th and 12th grade English teacher at a brand new high school in Columbia, Missouri. I was on the founding faculty of a brand new school called Battle High School in Columbia. And there I taught English, I taught religious studies, and it was a really cool job. And then a few years back, my family had an opportunity where we moved up to Buffalo, New York, and now I teach pretty much exclusively online. I teach for an online high school, and I write curriculum, and I teach online classes, and it's a really awesome life. And I have the project known as the Classical Ideas Podcast, which is closing in on 150 episodes, basically about the academic study of religion, religious literacy. How do we teach about religion? How can I learn from people who practice different religions? How can I learn from researchers who make that their life's work? And that is sort of me in a nutshell as far as like my academic history, career interests, and podcast interests.
Man, thank you so much. Well, I learned a lot just from that right there. I started listening to your show primarily because of my interest in religion and philosophy. I live on the Gulf Coast, kind of the I-10 corridor, and it just runs along, from Texas, Louisiana, and just stays along the Gulf Coast. Primarily very conservative. I would consider it the Bible Belt. That's what people would describe that as. So getting exposed to other religions and philosophies is not something you grow up with. If you want those things, you have to seek that out. And the truth of the matter is it's really difficult to build a network of like-minded people that have that same interest in this area. So when I kind of started listening to podcasts, I said, I realized this, I'm kind of like getting to peek in on the conversation. I really loved that format, that, getting to sit at the table with folks who are having these kinds of conversations that I was highly interested in. And of course, that's how I landed on you. And I thought, wow, this is great. This is a beautiful tool to be able to just reach out into anywhere in the world, really, and just sit down with people that you otherwise may have never encountered.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, so when I was teaching at my school in the middle of Missouri, and I think that Missourians may contest your location of the Bible Belts a little bit. I think they may say it's southwestern Missouri. So that can be an interesting cultural, a little interesting cultural tidbit. So when I was teaching at that school, I was asked to teach a religions class, and I was so into it immediately. And I mean, I knew that it was going to be just a major purpose for me to go to work every day. And so I dove right in. And the podcast actually started because I used to have like 20 to 25 guest speakers from all different religions come into my class and do Q&A with my students over the course of a school year.
Okay.
And so those were my best days of teaching ever, was actually when I was in a Q&A audience with my students talking to a Chabad rabbi or a former Zen monk or the founders of the local Hindu temple. And those are like my best days of school. And so then the parents of my students started saying, oh, my kid told me about this amazing conversation they have with the Catholic priest and then with the all women's Christianity panel discussion. And so then we started thinking like, oh, can I record the conversations? And then the administration told me that I couldn't record them because I had to get like signed releases for every person that was in the room just in case their voice appeared on the recording. And so public school, I was like, okay, that's way too complicated. I don't have time for that. So I loved podcasts. And so I started thinking, well, maybe I'll record conversations with my guest speakers of just me and them so that when the person appears in my classroom, the kid gets the in-class Q&A, but the parent can listen to the podcast interview with the same guest speaker, and then they can talk about it over dinner, and then they can shoot me an email saying what they talked about with their kid based on the different experiences with the same person. And then they can tell me what they talked about as a family, and I'll give the kid some extra credit in class. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I like that, man. The way that you think, too, the way you didn't just go, oh, I'm going to make a podcast. I love that element, how you thought of the dynamic between the child getting to do the Q&A and get the face-to-face and then bring it home. And then the parent has an opportunity to interact with that information as well. And then it creates this dialogue within the family. And it opens their mind and opens their eyes. And boy, that's just wonderful that you took that approach.
Yeah. And I was thinking about, so like if you go back and listen to the very, very early episodes, like episode 9 is about Jainism with my friend Nishant. And he and I are just sitting at his table in his apartment in Columbia, Missouri, talking about growing up as a Jain in India and then moving to the U.S. and then talking about what's interesting about being a Jain in the Midwest in the U.S. That's what the conversation is about. So he would come to school and he would talk to the students, and then the parents would listen to me and him in the conversation. It was just awesome. So like those early episodes are just me and local people creating a resource specifically for the parents of the students who are in my room. And that was my audience. It was just the parents.
Yeah.
And so that is the original purpose of the entire podcast in general.
Wow, that's incredible, and it's grown out from there. I can see how that happened. Well, I love that story.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's a great origin to a podcast. I mean, the nobleness of the goal, I guess. Your intent behind the whole thing, because so many people look at podcasting and they go, "Oh, this is the new media. How can we monopolize this, or how can we capitalize on it? Not monopolize. How can we make some money out of this? How can we, be the new thing, and get our message out there?" But what you were doing was actually trying to create conversations on a very hyper local level.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the show was never meant to be like a money thing, and I thought that I would get to be like, oh, maybe I'll do like 30 of these. So I really thought that I would get to about 30 episodes, and then I would have what I needed, and I would just be like, okay, that was a nice little project, and now I'm gonna move on to something else.
Yeah.
But now it's like 147 are out, and then I think I have like 4 or 5 bonus episodes. So there's actually more than 150 of them out there now, and that's why it started. I mean, so it just kept going. Well,
so, okay, that's awesome. I love that story. I have some questions. Anytime somebody is interested in religion or philosophy and spending the amount of time that you're spending in that realm, I'm always curious to know what brought you to that table.
Well, so, I mean, I grew up as a Catholic in St. Louis, Missouri in like the late 80s and early 90s. And so I did like Monday night PSR classes and confirmation classes and First Communion and all that stuff. And so like the way that it was is I would like go to school all day at my normal school, and then I would go to class again on Monday nights. And so growing up, religion did not particularly interest me. There are some very devoted practitioners of Catholicism within my family. I am not one of them. And I mean, I did it, and it was like, a nice childhood and everything, but
Sure.
I wasn't like particularly curious about religion growing up. I mean, I found like music when I was like 11, and that to me was way more of a religious experience for me than
Right.
going to church. So, I kind of meandered throughout it, but one of the major things that jumps out at me about religion and my interest in it is when I was in college, I found the book Hardcore Zen by Brad Warner. And that came out, I think it was on Wisdom Publications. And the only thing I found, the only reason I bought it was because I was into hardcore music, like, Minor Threat and like Black Flag and like the Misfits and stuff like that. And so I saw hardcore on the front of a book and it was like Zen. I was like, oh man. So the title just punched me right in the face.
Yeah.
So I bought that in the University of Missouri bookstore. Took it home, read it, loved it, and then I kind of tried to meditate a few times in my room in my apartment. I took some intro to religions classes at the University of Missouri, especially one on Hinduism, especially one on Chinese religions with a guy named Philip Klart, who now teaches in Germany. And so those were really cool experiences for me, but I was not a particularly intellectual person in college because I was a road cyclist. So like I was one of those annoying guys in like tight shorts, like riding bicycles on the side of the road, trying not to die. And that's what I did like all the time is I went to concerts, I went to class, I did my student teaching stuff, and I rode my bike. And so the religion stuff was kind of there along the way. But it wasn't particularly until I lived in the UK and I had a large percentage of immigrant students from all over the world.
Okay.
And a ton of students from India, a ton of students from Pakistan, and a ton of students who came from very devout Muslim families that I was not reaching as a teacher. And so I started exploring religion a little bit more, particularly Islam, whenever I lived in the UK, because I was like failing as a teacher. And so I felt like a professional duty to understand the cultures that my students were coming from a little bit more. And that's kind of what kickstarted it all. To get me to actually like read books about religion and to like find like awesome like YouTube videos about religion and documentaries and all kinds of stuff. So that was really kind of like the very meandering path of me becoming interested in religion. And, it all came from students in the classroom that I didn't understand them. They didn't understand me. And it was me trying to make my profession me trying to be more effective in my profession.
Man, that's incredible. So yeah, you were trying to speak their language essentially and try to communicate better, huh? I mean, that's kind of...
Yeah, essentially. I mean, every teacher goes into education because they care about young people. And if you find that you are just not connecting with certain facets of your student population, you either should quit teaching or you should try to get better. So I tried to get better because I didn't want to quit.
Yeah, you seem like you have a real eagerness to learn. Like you just like, do you have a hunger for learning like new things? And
oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I have tons of hobbies. Like I run marathons and half marathons. I ride bikes a lot still. I have way too many books in my house. I collect vinyl records. I play guitar. I play drums. I love cooking. I love cooking. So I just kind of have this feeling that every day you should just try to do things And that's kind of like the meaning of life to me, is just like doing a new thing sort of like all the time, and not really settling for stagnation, not really settling for like, just like, oh, well, this is my life now. Oh, well.
Yeah.
I try to just keep the mind ticking, because I'm 36. And so like, I feel like I could either just stagnate for the rest of my life and into middle age and into old age and just kind of fall apart, or I can just be like, all right, I'm going to be learning on my deathbed, and that's just the way it's going to be. So that's kind of the path that I've chosen for life.
Well, that's interesting. So I'm about 10 years older than you, and I wish that I had said what you just said when I was 36 years old. You know,
Yeah.
that's good. If you can hang on to that, I mean, that's a wonderful thing. And life continues to reveal new things whenever you have that curiosity, right? I mean, is curiosity a big driver for you?
Absolutely. I mean, I gave a TED talk called Get Curious.
Okay.
That was, I mean, you can find it on I think it's on the Classical Ideas YouTube page. I think I
Okay.
uploaded it there. But it was at a local TEDx event that I gave a few years back. And absolutely, curiosity. I mean, if I think about like, why am I on this planet? I can't really sum it up any better than just curiosity. And so I think that just being a curious and open person to the ideas and the ways of the world has just been really rewarding for me so far. I like to think that I don't have the answers to pretty much anything.
There you
Like
go.
I feel like I don't really know anything for sure, and I'm just pretty much okay with that. If I go through the rest of my life and if I'm like, oh well, I don't really know. I mean, that's okay with me. I kind of thrive on uncertainty a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'm just totally fine with it. Like, I don't need to have tons and tons of answers. I just like asking questions.
Yeah, well, I like that. So I've heard you dive into a whole nother avenue here. I've heard you mention the Tao Te Ching often on your show.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah, I
have
love
lots
it.
of translations. And so when you said what you just said, it kind of reminded me of the verse where it says, I alone don't know, I alone don't care, my mind is empty, I'm like an idiot, or something like to that effect, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually love that book so much because there's no dates, there's no people, there's no locations, there's no specific historical events. It is as vague and as personal as you want to make it. Yeah. And you can read the Tao Te Ching every single week of a year, and something that is happening in your personal life will resonate differently when you read that book. And like, I'm not a Taoist. Like, I don't really know a lot about what people who are Taoist even do, but I know that I can read the Tao Te Ching at any given time on any given day, and it's going to speak to me in some way.
Man, that's a good way to say that. It's one of those lifetime books. I have this saying I've told many people. I said, there's certain books in your life that when you read them, you actually remember where you were when you closed the cover.
Yep.
And that was one of those books. I was driving through New Mexico, and my father was driving, and I had been reading it as we were driving, just sort of I call it the wasteland. There was just nothing out there, and it was really hitting me a certain way because of the landscape,
Yeah.
And I finished it when we stopped at a gas station, and I was sitting on the tailgate of the truck and just looking out, at the road ahead of us, and just the wind was blowing. And I just have that captured in this sort of bottle in my mind, because that book was imprinting upon, just as you said, it was imprinting upon my life at the time when I'm 20 years old, And so, just as you said, you read it today and it sort of imprints upon what's going on in your life. It's vague enough. God, you said that perfectly. I'd never heard anybody say it. It's vague enough, but it's also very personal to what's going on at the moment.
Oh my gosh. And I'm actually holding it in my hand right now. So I have my favorite translation that's always on my desk, right to my right. It's in my bookshelf next to my desk. And I just pulled it up and I picked it up. And my favorite version is the one by Stephen Addis and Stanley Lombardo. And I've said that on my show so many times. I think everybody should buy this version. And on the front cover, the poet and Zen teacher Gary Snyder says, of the many translations I have read in English, this is unquestionably the best.
Oh, wow. I'm going to have to get a copy of that, because I have heard you mention it.
Yeah, here it is.
There you go. Okay, I see it.
The paperback version is out from Hackett, and the hardback version is out from Shambhala. And I've actually met Stanley Lombardo. I did a Zen retreat with him in Lawrence, Kansas, and he's a San Zen master ordained by Sung San, who wrote The Compass of Zen. And he's a Zen teacher in Lawrence, Kansas. He's an emeritus professor over there, and he's a translator of amazing literature. And I got to sit with him for 2 days. And whenever that Gary Snyder quote jumped out at me at the bookstore, I was like, this is the one I'm buying.
Yeah.
And I've read so many Tao Te Chings, and it's just so amazing. I love it. So I think everybody should buy that Addison Lombardo version.
Well, I'm going to have to do that. The version and I guess it's because it's the first one I read, and I have a few different versions, but the one I always go back to is Stephen Mitchell.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Classic.
Yeah, I thought it was really good. And I kind of, at that time in my life, after I read that, I kind of went down a Stephen Mitchell rabbit hole. It was like I went and started buying all these different things he had translated, because I guess I took that, since that book spoke to me so much, his other translations must. I didn't quite have the same experience with all of them, but he did lead me down a path. I got to say, Stephen Mitchell is one of those people that I got to look back on my life and go, yeah, if I wouldn't have went down that Stephen Mitchell hole, I may not have encountered all these other cultures and religious books, because he had translated so many different things.
Yeah, my folks that are like that is, so the guy who does the Indian translations, Eknath Easwaran, he's a big one for me. Brad Warner is a big one for me. Stanley Lombardo is a big one for me, because he also did the Bhagavad Gita. He does a lot of Homer. He does a lot of Virgil. He did the Tao Te Ching. He did Gilgamesh, that I really love. So, I have those people too.
Yeah.
I love it.
So that's actually one of the questions I had sent you over, and I'm curious, since we're talking about this, I call it your deserted island books. Some people say music. What's your album? And maybe we can talk about that too. But I'd love to know, if you had to narrow it down to 5 books that you can just live with, what would they be?
So as far as books go, I have a lot. I have a collection of authors that just really resonate with me. And the biggest one is the Japanese novelist Haruki Murakami. And the book that I would recommend that everybody start with Murakami is The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. And Murakami has an amazing array of fantastic novels. I've read pretty much all of them except for his most recent one, Killing Commendatore. But I love Murakami. And the thing that I love so much about Murakami's books is that I don't really know why I love them so much. I can't articulate it. I've never been able to articulate it, because a lot of his characters are immensely unlikable to me. But for some reason, the writing is just so alluring that I can't look away while I'm reading it. So he's just like eminently entertaining to me.
Yeah.
The next one I would say is Margaret Atwood. Her Oryx and Crake trilogy is just amazing. And obviously The Handmaid's Tale, but her Oryx and Crake trilogy to me is number one. I also love, let's see, I really love Barbara Kingsolver, The Poisonwood Bible.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And I really liked her Lacuna, the book The Lacuna. I'm also a huge fan of the Indian graphic novel company Amar Chitrakata, who does all the Bhagavad Gita, Ramayana, graphic novel comic books that are like Hindu epics put into comic book form. And let's see, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, I'm a huge fan of actually a guy who's a singer in a band named Keith Buckley. He lives here in Buffalo, and he's got some really fun novels that I love. So I am sort of giving you like the digestible stuff that I really like.
Yeah.
So those like the novels and the fiction and things like that I really enjoy. I also love Marlon James, the guy who wrote The Brief History of Seven Killings. That is an incredible book. And Nnedi Okorafor, who wrote Who Fears Death. Love her. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. So there's a ton of authors that I just absolutely love.
Man, so you're reading all the time.
What's really funny is for a long time I read almost constantly. And what's been really fascinating is my trend in reading. So these are all those authors that I just listed. I loved before I did the podcast. And so in the last like a couple of years, I've almost exclusively read just as preparation for podcast chats. And so my reading is really messed up right now because I don't know if I've read a complete book in, I mean, maybe a few here and there, a few complete books over the years. But right now I feel like I'm just reading as many chapters of like academic books as I can get through and like journal articles and stuff. So my reading is really, really messed up right now. But I absolutely love to read whenever I feel like I have the space to do it. But I'm kind of like I'm struggling with reading at the moment.
No, I understand that. I love to read as well. And I did that too. When I was in my 20s, there was probably a decade there where I felt like I was reading every day. And then I went through this time period where I just kind of stopped altogether. I felt like, you ever feel like you just are saturated with so much information and you just go, okay, I need some time to process everything I've already read before I move into some other direction.
Absolutely. I mean, right now, if I ever feel like I have to read fiction, but I know for a fact that I will fail in reading the entire book, I read The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Leo Tolstoy. Yeah. Because hold on, it's right here. It's only like 55 pages long. Right. And so like I can read that book many, many, many times. So whenever I'm really craving some good fiction, I just get Ivan Ilyich, and it just kind of does the trick for me and kind of soothes me whenever I feel like I'm struggling to read.
That's interesting that you bring that book up. I don't think about it as much as I used to, but that was in a lineup of books in that time period where I was trying to figure out where I was spiritually, and that was in that mix of books. And I still to this day, when I think of the Death of Ivan Ilyich, I think of it as a spiritual book. I mean, it gets a perspective. It sets a perspective on life, basically. It's like, hey, framing Absolutely. It against wasting it. Essentially, like what you said, don't waste your time here.
Exactly.
It's interesting that you picked that one up.
Well, and Ivan Ilyich that book is funny to me, and it's also tragic. So it's just tragic and hilarious all at once. And there's this guy just laying on the sofa, just dying, and everybody's like, yeah, okay, whatever. And he's asking them to care, but he never cared for his entire life. So now he's asking people to care about him when he didn't care about them while he was healthy. And so it's just there's just a massive life lesson just packed in there all at once in 55 pages.
It's funny, man, that you said that, and I'm glad you told the listeners who haven't read it so they can understand what it's about. I think of that book often when I encounter people in the world or these figures arise in the world where you're like, man, they're just despicable. I mean, and there's a part of my mind even today, that goes, I wonder if they're ever going to have that Ivan Ilyich moment where he goes, oh my God, what did I do? What kind of life did I live?
Yeah, well, I feel like Breaking Bad had a lot of Ivan Ilyich within it. Like as Walter was like suffering from cancer and like trying to do stuff, I felt like he was almost like an Ivan Ilyich on screen in today's time.
Man, how powerful is that? I didn't even think that, but that reframes that show in a whole new light.
I thought about the entire series. Wow. I was like, oh man, it's like Ivan Ilyich.
God, that's true. Man, that's something I would actually like to go watch again, because I think when you're watching a type of show like Breaking Bad with these really harsh things that conflict you, basically, where the villain is the hero, it's who you're following. That was kind of the first thing I ever watched like that, actually, where you're to care for the villain, so to speak. I guess
exactly.
Very strange.
And that's what Ivan Ilyich is. He's a bad guy, and we're like watching his death. So we're like, oh, do we pity him? Do we hate him?
Yeah, it's true. It's like if you can find compassion for Ivan, then that's some really good soul work and heart work to do. If you can find compassion for someone like Ivan. Yeah, it's interesting. I guess I forgot that book was so short because it had such an impact. It's just got a little bit of a punch to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So anyway, that's sort of me and my life with literature.
Yeah. Another book that's kind of like that to me was Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse.
I love that book.
Oh my gosh. I read that book by accident, honestly. I was going down a Buddhist avenue in my life when I was younger, and that the name of the book just attracted me. So, this must be another book about Buddhism. I didn't really know what it was about. And then as I'm reading it, I go, oh, this isn't about the Buddha. This is this independent character, and what a great story, man. I mean, just
Absolutely.
cycle. So good.
Yep. I love it. And I used to actually make my seniors in my religions class back in Missouri read that book. They read the whole thing.
Yeah. So, okay, let's talk about your classroom for a bit, man.
Sure.
I'm fascinated by this. And just let me tell you, I didn't grow up in a school that had any kind of religious studies. So when I realized you were you were teaching high school, 11th and 12th grade, I was like, well, what high school has a religious studies class?
So Columbia, Missouri is a pretty special place. The people who live there love the city for the most part. And there is a guy who lives there named George Frizzell. And George was the first podcast guest that I ever had on my show, the Classical Ideas Podcast. And there's a very particular reason for that, is because George is the founder of the Classical Ideas and World Religions elective in Columbia Public Schools. So in the late 80s, George was teaching in Columbia, Missouri, and his students said that they would like to learn more about religion because he was like, they were learning about it in history class a little bit, and they were learning a little bit about it in English class with George. And so they kept saying, oh, we wish we had a class about religion, just about religion. So George started this class, and it has attained a mythical, legendary status within the town. And for years, the students who take the class get T-shirts with the logo of what is actually my podcast logo. They get it on T-shirts. And so in town in Columbia, Missouri, on any given day, you can be at the mall or at Target or at Starbucks, and you'll see somebody with a Classical Ideas and World Religions T-shirt with Aristotle or Gandhi quotes on the back of it, whatever we did in any given year. And you go up to him and you're like, oh, hey, you took World Religion or you took Classical Ideas, huh? So it's like a thing in the town.
That's really cool, man.
Yeah, for decades, students have taken this class. And so when my new school opened up, the class had like 17 or 18 students enrolled. So I got to teach it, and George and I became friends, and he kind of mentored me through the process of teaching about religion in a public school. So like George was my sort of introduction to like how to be constitutionally appropriate and how to have conversations that don't cross any theological lines within a classroom. And he's like one of my best friends, and he's actually retired now, but the class lives on at George's old school with a new teacher named John, who I'm also friends with. And the class is not currently happening at the school that I taught for 5 years, but it might make a comeback sometime, but it's still going in the original school, just with a different teacher than George.
Yet that I got a little bit of envy whenever I realized that you were teaching, listening to your show, and I realized that you were teaching a class like that. One, I wanted that for my teenage son. He's 16, he's a junior in high school, and I thought, boy, he would really love this. I mean, because we're having these kinds of dynamic philosophical and religious, and spiritual conversations at home, and it's very broad in all these different categories, because I really encourage him to kind of find his own way. We don't have like a religious culture at our house. We didn't grow up that way. I didn't grow up that way. It's very alien for us to have one, doctrine or foundation in our home. So I encourage them to find the door that is going to lead them wherever, their heart's taking them, and in a healthy way, obviously, but, yeah, so for him to have that at school would be awesome. So I was like, man, I kind of got a little bit of envy in that regard. But the other thing was I just tried to imagine what this must be like, the complexities of it and then the joy of it as well. I mean, you just said some of those complexities, how do you have a class like that and not cross theological boundaries? Because it seems like it would almost, by its very nature, happen.
It's a very delicate balance. And over the years, George and I have both had to end a guest speaker's appearance in our room because all of a sudden the conversation would take a turn that was constitutionally inappropriate for a public school. So George and I have both had to, meet with people in advance, make sure they understood like the way it's supposed to be and understand what they can and should not do. And over the years, George and I both had to step in and say, okay, unfortunately, this conversation has veered into theologically inappropriate territory, and I'm gonna call this right now. But almost everybody, and I would have like 25 guest speakers per year, and that happened to me one time. So, I mean, there were only like 85 meetings per year because the class only met every other day.
Okay.
So out of like 85 meetings in a year or 90 meetings in a year, a full quarter of them were with guest speakers interacting directly with people who do the things that we're studying.
So this is an elective class?
Yeah, well, it's an elective, but I'm also dual certified in Missouri, so like I could teach social studies or English classes.
Okay.
So students would be able to choose the credit that they took it for in their senior year. So I had all seniors, and they could choose for English or for social studies. So that was kind of a really cool perk as well.
Did you see anything special happen in those classes, Greg? Like, did you?
Oh yeah.
The mind opening up, these kids.
100%. And I mean, there was one year where I had a very like new atheist style atheist young man in the class who was like very into like Richard Dawkins, and like Chris Hitchens and Sam Harris and folks like that, and a woman across the room who was a born again evangelical who talked about the Bible in very literal terms. And so they would snipe at each other across the room in conversations during class throughout the entire year.
Interesting.
But the thing is, they never were insulting. They would just be like, well, I vehemently disagree with what you just said, and here's why. And what was so cool about it was at the end of the year, the students do a final as a group. And those two students did their final together. Really? And they chose that. And they chose that dynamic because throughout the course of the year, they both realized that the other one had been their greatest source of intellectual growth.
Wow.
So I had the Richard Dawkins atheist and I had the born again evangelical biblical literalist talking to each other for their final and collaborating together on their final project and loving every second of it.
That is an incredible thing, isn't it? I think sometimes the sentiments that we see in the media would have you believe that everybody's just, I call it the curse of this and that. Everybody's either this or they're that. And everybody thinks that way. It's super polarized. But right there in the classroom, you see that these two people who maybe live in two different camps, I'll say it that way, they still want to dialogue with the other person. They still have this eagerness to learn about them and to grow. That's something that I've always kind of scratched my head about with religion, and I'd be curious to hear what you think about this. I always wonder why it's such a source of contention when it's supposed to be a source of, to me anyway, of consolation. Yeah,
well, I mean, to me, I find consolation. I am able to find consolation in virtually any religious text. If you give me a religious text from almost any tradition and I sit down and I read it, I am open enough to that text and willing to learn to where I can find something in any religious text that is extremely worthy and extremely good and extremely powerful for me in any given moment. And so I also don't think that I have any real answers. So I think that whenever people feel like they have the answer and the book or the text, it's just extremely limiting. And honestly, I find, I find certainty almost boring in a way. Like I get bored by complete certainty. And And so that's kind of my approach to it is I can pick up. So like I have like 4 different Qurans sitting right next to me right now. And I've got 3 different Bhagavad Gitas on the shelf above it. And I've got the Upanishads and I've got the Analects of Confucius and I have the Book of Mormon all right here at eye level right now as I'm talking to you. And I can pick up any one of them right now and I can find the good in any of them. And that to me is just kind of what I think is cool about it.
Yeah, you're going to get what you go mining for. I mean, that's
totally.
the truth. Yeah, I mean, I feel that way about biblical scripture, too. I was kind of thinking about that the other morning. You know, it's, again, like you had said about the Tao Te Ching, you can imprint it over your life, and almost like a magic 8-ball, you're going to see whatever you're looking for. You're going to find something to support your worldview. What I'm looking for, just as you said, is I'm looking for something to crash through what I already know, so I can see something in a new way.
Yeah, well, because those are the moments when you actually learn. When you crash against what you feel like you know, that's actual learning to me.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I didn't write this down in the questions I had sent you, but I heard it on your podcast. You were talking with your recent guest about taking field trips with your students, and I thought, man, that sounds like it's highly valuable. And one of the things you had said, which I thought that's how we all are, isn't it? You know, people that had lived in these areas for 40 years and said, I've driven by this temple for 40 years. I've never thought to stop and go inside.
Absolutely. I mean, that was so. Logistically, field trips for a teacher are a nightmare. It's the worst because there are so many forms that you have to fill out, and oftentimes you have to like raise money for a bus, or you have to like request funds from your department head. So my field trips were for my religions class were, for very, very many reasons, entirely optional. And so, like, you know, imagine me requiring a group of 60 high school students to go to the masjid in town, the mosque, and, you know, then I would be in the newspaper. I mean, it's just the way it is. Like, requiring people to go on field trips to religious sites is just not possible as a teacher. And, you know, if you could like obviously say, oh, I'm going to opt out. But so the way I always did the field trips was we usually did it on like a Saturday. Or we would I would call ahead to like the synagogue and I would say, oh, we're going to come to a Shabbat service. And I would just say, hey, everybody, I'm going to be there at this time on this day. And if you and your family and friends want to come and sit in the back with me and do some Q&A afterwards, I would love to have you. And that's kind of how I did the field trips, is I would offer a time when I was going to be at a religious house of worship, and I would open the invitation to all parents, all students, and their friends and family, etc. And I would just go and I would be there, and people would always show up. So that was kind of how I did it, is I just said, this is where I'm going to be, and if you come, I'll give you extra credit for class. If you don't. And so I would offer like a little like class incentive, but I would always make it extra, and I would allow people to explore it if they felt like it. And usually the way I would do it is I would have a person come in, the guest speaker who was from that house of worship, and do Q&A, so that like the very next Saturday they would be able to go and hang out with that exact person in their house of worship, so that they felt like another layer of comfort. And that's kind of how I went about it.
Yeah, that's really awesome. The proximity to places like that where I live are very lean. I mean, you have to really travel if you want to go to a Buddhist temple, or if you want to go to a Zen center. There's just not a lot of that, even within like 2 hours from where I'm at in any direction. 30 minutes from here, of course, that's way less than 2 hours, but it's kind of tucked away in the middle of nowhere. There's a little Buddhist community that had migrated to the United States during the Vietnam War. And so it's more like a neighborhood of Vietnamese Buddhists. So they have a little temple and a little garden area. And so once a year, they have like a garden festival, and it's a really pretty place. You can go in there and buy, lotuses and trees and flowers that they grow in the garden. But that's really kind of it as far as what I'm looking, I'm actively looking for things like that. I do think there might be a small Tibetan center in Lafayette, which is about an hour from here.
Oh, cool.
But, it's hard to find information. You go online and it's just not, I don't know, the website, of course, if you're trying to find it through a website, you probably need to just drive over there and walk in the door.
Well, and like the religions of the world, and my interest in them guides how I travel also. So for example, back in October, I went to New York City to see the Misfits at Madison Square Garden, and so I had some time to kill during the day. And so what I did is I just I would go on Google Maps in Manhattan and I would type in Zen, enter, and then I would see where there was Zen locations in Manhattan. And then I would type in Judaism, enter, and I would see where the different Jewish houses of worship were in New York City. And I did like Gurdwara, Sikhism, and then I would see where those were. And then I would just walk around the city and I would just look at religiously important sites in Manhattan. And that was what I would do. I wouldn't even go inside though. I would just like look at the building and then I would go to the next one, So this, thinking about these things makes it so that like if I'm ever in a new city, I just type something into Google Maps and then I go look at it. Like I'm never bored when I go to places that I have never been, because this gives me something always to do if I find myself with a little bit of free time.
I love that. We kind of do the same thing, my wife and I, when we travel. That's exactly what we did on our last trip. We were over in Texas and we did the same thing. And we found a Buddhist temple, out in the middle of the woods somewhere. And it was just as you said, you're not engaging with people necessarily, but you get to be exposed to the architecture and the art. I never really had thought about that religious travel and tourism. We actually work in travel and tourism, so it's kind of an interesting perspective. I did kind of have a thought like that. I'm a part of I guess like a group that's working on trying to clean up our area with litter and recycling and things like that. But I do notice that when I go to those meetings, it hit me at the last one, the majority of the conversations are how can we get the schools involved, or how can we get industry involved? How can we get businesses involved? And I was listening to all that and I thought, we're not really bringing in a religious or spiritual dimension, but this is a problem that could be addressed by those entities as well. And each one might be able to bring some really beautiful perspectives about stewardship to the table. So I decided that would be sort of my role in that. And I know it's an odd side door into religion, but I thought, if you can get the religions that do exist here, or the people that are involved in those religions, to also look at the environment through that lens, it might even awaken some interest in their own faith or their own religion that they didn't know, elements that were there that they weren't really seeking out.
Well, and something that's interesting in what you just said is like it exposes people to new things within their own religion. So that to me was actually a very intriguing finding for me as a teacher, was watching students learn new things about their own religions. And I was often wondering before I started teaching the class, will a class like this accidentally change any people's minds? You know what I mean? Like I go into it like explicitly being like, this is not a conversion effort. Like I have this big spiel that I go through where I'm like, if you are seeking to, find ammunition against other religions, you're in the wrong place. If you are using this as a way to reinforce your preconceived notions, you are in the wrong place. If you, please feel free to drop the class if these are your motivations. Like all of that stuff. And then at the end of the year, the students would always, like, almost nobody would walk away being like, oh, I am now I'm now Muslim.
Yeah.
Like that does not happen in classrooms. So people are really afraid that religious studies as an academic pursuit is going to lead a mass conversion of their children away from their original religions. And that does not happen. Like that just doesn't happen. at least not in my experience of teaching about it in an American high school classroom for 5 years.
That is a really good point. I'm glad you said that, because there is a fear when I talk to people just in my life and in circles that I travel in. I sense that there's a fear that if I read a book about meditation, if I read a book that has Buddhism in it of any kind, or if I read something about Taoism or Hinduism, it's almost like where I live, and this isn't fair. Let me just say this before I say what I'm about to say. It's not fair because I don't know everybody. I'm just going to say that the majority of the people I encounter, there is a fear that if I enter that place, I'm going to get converted and I'm not being faithful to what, the group I'm in, my religion, what I was brought up in. I'm being unfaithful to that to some degree. So there is like a resistance there. And that's something that I would love to see sort of begin to soften and melt away, because I agree with you. You don't have to change your religion to acquire gifts from other religions as you learn about them. In fact, if anything, I find it only magnifies sometimes what you already hold dear.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I do my very best on the Classical Ideas podcast to feature voices of teachers and scholars and educators who are doing an awesome job of furthering the goals of religious literacy in society. So like my most recent episode is with a teacher who lives in Maryland who teaches religious studies. And I've had multiple guests from the Religious Freedom Center, like Ben Marcus and Dr. Charles Haynes on the show. I have had several teachers on the show, George Coe, who lives in Washington, D.C. Who else have I had? John Camardella, who lives in Chicago. George Frizzell, who lives in Columbia, Missouri. And so like I do my best to feature the voices of teachers who teach about this stuff in very compelling, very current ways. And I would definitely encourage people to ask for these types of classes in their local public school districts. I mean, if you ask for it, public education is a public good. If you demand it and you ask for it, it will most likely happen. So
really?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if students want a class like this in their public school districts and they ask for it, there's probably a teacher in that district who will take up the cause and who will probably design an amazing course for it and have amazing experiences for students for years to come. But if nobody ever asks for it, how is it supposed to happen?
Yeah, no, it's true. It's an encouragement. I like that. I think that's a good. I guess I never think of it that way. You just think, oh, this is the system that you're in, and you just sort of roll with it. But it's people like you and other people that like you've had on your show who go, hey, well, like even your recent guest, he used that as an opportunity, that city council or city town hall meeting or whatever. He had told a story. I just listened to it this morning, so I'll probably mess it up. But, where he saw that they were opened a can of worms by having to give the school calendar where everybody was off for a different religious holiday.
Yeah.
So they didn't really handle it the right way, and so they just shut it all down. And he sees that there's an opportunity here to educate people, and it sounds like you think like that too. And I think that if more people thought like that, you'd see more of these types of things. I'm not sure if there's anybody working in our area where I live that feels that passionately about it, but that would be really fantastic. I guess I never really thought of it that way. You just have to have somebody go, hey, I bring it to the table.
And like that guides a lot of the things that I do for the show, for my own classrooms as well, because I've landed like for my show, like Pulitzer Prize winners, New York Times bestselling authors. I mean, the celebrity chef, Eric Ripert, who was on Parts Unknown with Anthony Bourdain, the daughters of Alan Watts. Like,
yes.
And my philosophy for the show is just ask. What are they going to do? Say, no, I can't come on your show? Do you know what I mean? Like, I've found that so many people who I ask say yes. And that is like the biggest endearing and heartening quality of it all is like people want to do cool stuff. People want to talk about neat ideas. So like if you have an idea, just ask. I mean, what is the other person going to do? Say no? I mean, whatever. They say no. Who cares?
Yeah. Well, look,
then you move on.
I kind of felt that when I started reaching out to people outside of the area to be on this show, I kind of felt like that too, because I'll read a book that I like and I go, well, I wonder if this person would want to be on my show. In your mind, you elevate them to a place that's sort of above you and that you're down here somewhere. That's kind of how my mind worked initially. And I was like, well, they probably wouldn't be interested. And it's like just what you said, though. I said, well, let me just ask the question. I mean, all they can do is say, no, I don't have time for that, or no, I'm not interested.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, like, my show is not like a powerful show. Like, I don't have any advertising money. I get roughly 1,000 to 1,500 downloads for any given episode. So, like, if there's a professor who comes on my show, they're probably going to get like 1,200, 1,300, 1,400 downloads, and then maybe 700 of them will actually listen to the conversation. So it's not like it's a massive audience, but hey, I mean, 700 new people listening to an hour-long conversation with you. I mean, that's kind of cool. Maybe you'll sell some books.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree. That's why I listen to your show. I mean, it's an educational component to my life. I mean, I look forward to who's next. And like I said, I still have a backlog that I haven't even listened to yet. But I have found that my wife even likes listening to them. When we'll go on trips together, I'll go, "Oh, you'd really like this conversation," even though she may not hear the beginning of whatever y'all were talking about. I'll play it with her in the car, and then we have these wonderful conversations, or I'll look over to the right and she'll be going, yep, I like that. And, she's nodding in acknowledgement that something's resonating with her. And my son too, same thing.
And what's so funny? Like, there are so many episodes now, like there's like 150-ish. And so if anybody is interested in listening to the show, 150 episodes of something is like so daunting. Where do I begin? Do I have to listen to them in order? So anybody who actually has like Twitter or something like that, like if you like ping me on Twitter and say, hey, I'm super interested in Taoism, tell me where I can find information about Taoism on your show. And I will send you like a tailored, individualized guide to listening to my show that fit your interests. Like, you know what I mean? So like I will tell you exactly which episodes you should listen to. And, like I have some episodes that aren't that great. And I have some episodes that are amazing. So if I can like individually tailor the listening experience, I will.
Yeah, that's awesome, man, that you do that. I don't do that. And I never really thought about that. So somebody
all you gotta do is ask.
Wow, that's an extra service that you don't get. Well, and there you go again. That's another encouragement to reach out to the person who's producing the show. Yeah. I mean, you want to share this information. You're not just saying, "Hey, I made the show. Why should I have to do something extra?"
Exactly.
You brought this up, and I wanted to talk a little bit about it, if you don't mind, when you spoke to Alan Watts' daughters.
Oh man, yeah. What do you want to know?
I mean, man, what did that feel like? I mean, that's one of those that when I was looking at your show and going through the playlist or the episodes, I thought, wait a second, Alan Watts? And then I went, that's his daughters. I was like, what the heck is this? Where is this coming from? To me, it was amazing, I guess, that you had that. And I can imagine how you probably felt when you secured those interviews.
So, I mean, anybody who is like has read any books about religion or is like watching YouTube or whatever has come across like Alan Watts lectures or Alan Watts books at some point. And for anybody who doesn't know who Alan Watts is, he was a British man who was born, I think, around like 1915 and died in the early 1970s. He was an Anglican priest who was ordained as a priest in Chicago, in the Chicago suburbs, in Evanston, I believe. And he then became well known for popularizing Zen Buddhism in the West around the time of like D.T. Suzuki and the arrival of like Shunryu Suzuki Roshi in San Francisco, who founded the San Francisco Zen Center. So Alan Watts is like kind of like a philosophical thinker who had a really amazing way of distilling religious ideas to a wide audience on like books and lecture tours. Anyway, so I like Alan Watts' books a whole lot, and I'm sure a lot of people who are listening would as well. And so he's super well known, especially for his books about Zen. And I'm interested in Zen. I think I've done like 20 something episodes just about Zen Buddhism on my show. And so Alan Watts was a very complicated figure as well. Very, very imperfect and flawed human being with a lot of issues. And there was a book coming out from New World Library, who is one of the publishers that I partner with a ton. And I noticed that it was the collected letters of Alan Watts by Joan and Ann Watts. And so I emailed the publicist at New World Library, who I befriended because she helped me book Brad Warner for early in my show, like episode 22, 21, something like that. And I asked, is there any way that I can talk to one of the authors, Joan or Ann Watts? And they said, well, would you like to do both? And I was like, well, would I be able to have different conversations with them? Like, I was really worried about having both of them because I was afraid that they would overlap. And they said they're very different. The conversations will not overlap, and you should say yes. And I said, okay. So they encouraged me to accept both of them as guests. And so episode 32 and 33 is with Joan, who is the oldest daughter, and episode 33 is with Anne, who is the second eldest daughter of Alan Watts. And they talked about growing up with this philosophical thinker who was interested in religion as a dad, and all the stories that they remember about him, his complexities as a person, the fact that he was a very well-known expert in Zen Buddhism, but he didn't really have like a committed meditation practice, which is like super funny to me, and I loved it. All the personal anecdotes that they shared were so wonderful. And they were so kind and so nice. And funny story is their grandmother is a woman named Ruth Fuller Sasaki. And Ruth Fuller Sasaki was the first Westerner ever ordained as a Rinzai Zen priest in Japan. So Alan Watts' mother-in-law is actually a far more committed Zen practitioner than he ever was. And Ruth Fuller Sasaki, Joan and Ann's grandmother, wrote a few books about Zen in the 1950s and 60s, I believe. And I was in Toronto several months ago, and I found a first edition Ruth Fuller Sasaki book in a basement bookstore in Toronto, Canada. Get out of here. And that's I bought it. And I emailed Joan and I said, hey, I bought this. And she said, nobody in our family has that book. And I said, I will mail it to you right now. Awesome, man. That is so awesome. Seriously. And it was the first edition of it. The book is called Zen, a Religion. And it's extremely rare. And I found it and I just mailed it to Joan Watts, who lives out west. And now the family has a copy of their grandmother's book. So like these friendships and these little relationships that I form with these guests on this show, they resonate over time. And you know what I mean? Like I've met since then, I've met like 20 or 30 people. Every time I go to a new town, I try to meet people that have been on my show, and then we go to lunch. And it's just amazing to do a little creative project with somebody and then have these friendships or these little, communications last over time. I love that. I love that you're calling those friendships and that they are real friendships for you too, because I think, you've turned your teaching career and this podcast into, I don't know, you've turned it into a communion table, basically. I mean, where everybody's invited to sit and, join in. Oh, yeah. I mean, if you came to Niagara Falls with your family on a trip, like I would totally come and hang out with you. If I came down to Louisiana and I was like anywhere near you, I would totally try and come and like have lunch with you. Do you know what I mean? Like that's kind of like what I do for all the people that have been on the show. Is if they're anywhere near me or I'm anywhere near them, I try to make it happen. And my wife knows that I do that too. She's like super committed to me hanging out with my past podcast guests. That takes it. That's something beautiful, man. I got to tell you, because that's sort of what I had hoped with Find the Good News. My initial thing was that social media can be a very dark and ugly place, but it doesn't have to be a dark and ugly place. I mean, I heard the other day in a book I was listening to, things that hurt can also harm and vice versa. And he was kind of talking about social media, how cults use social media to hook people now. They have this big platform that they didn't have before.
And I was like, yeah, that's true. But at the same time, if you choose to use social media and communication tools for good, you can make real human connections that you couldn't have made otherwise. And that's what you're doing. I love that. You're taking it beyond, you get it off the digital and into the real world.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's really rewarding to have these situations and friendships last over time. But back to Alan Watts, I read that entire book and the collected letters and the conversations that I was able to have because I engaged so deeply with the book. Being able to talk to Joan and Ann, who are in their 70s and 80s themselves, about their dad, who's been dead for over 40 years, was super powerful. And I actually got an email from a historian after I put those episodes out, and he said, "Thank you so much for those conversations. I bet that historians will mine those conversations for biographical details when they continue to dissect the work of Alan Watts in the future in academic departments." And that was so wild. I was like, wow, somebody could write an APA citation about my podcast episode. That is so neat.
Yeah, because that's the beauty. Yeah, man. Wow. Well, okay. Well, that kind of leads into one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, would you consider that a pivotal episode for you, where you go, man, things have changed with this show?
Yeah, for sure. But right before I had Ann and Joan, so Ann and Joan are episodes 32 and 33, but episode 29 with the journalist named Ian Johnson, he's a Pulitzer Prize winner.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So episode 29 is with a Pulitzer Prize winner. So yes, episode 32 and 33 with Ann and Joan Watts are the pivotal moments. That the Joan Watts episode is my most downloaded episode ever. It gets downloaded every single day.
Wow.
From somewhere in the world. Because whenever you type in Alan Watts into any podcast app, my episode with Joan pops right up. And so, but yeah, episode 29 was with a Pulitzer Prize winner. And that is incredible to me as well. And I think that episode 29 is actually arguably my most overlooked episode.
Really?
Yeah, for sure. Because I put it out so early in the show that if I put out that episode now with Ian, who's a Pulitzer Prize winner, like I said, it would get quadruple the amount of downloads in the next month than it got when I put it out in December 2017.
One of my coworkers said something about that, and she said, I think what we're witnessing in these early days, when you have those early episodes that are before you have 50 or even 100 episodes, there's almost like a wait and see attitude with people when they're looking for podcasts. I don't know if you have those habits, but I do, where I'll go look at a show and go, well, let me see how many they've actually produced, because I don't want to get invested if they've only got 12 episodes and it's been a year since one's come out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So in those early ones, maybe people were just, I don't know. That's a phenomenon that we've noticed as well.
One of my favorite episodes that I ever did is episode 51 with an ex-Scaverer Hasid named Shulam Dean. And he wrote a book called All Who Go Do Not Return, about leaving an ultra-insular Orthodox Jewish community. And that episode is absolutely amazing, and it's so far back now in my catalog that it hardly gets downloaded, and it's such a shame because it is so good. I've had people listen to that episode and cry.
Really?
Yeah, and so so many things in my back catalog are really, really good. I look back at it and I can't believe it's actually me who made it, and I'm just man, I can't believe how proud of this I am.
So do you have those curated somewhere? I know you have your the different aggregators that push the podcast out, but do you have all of your favorite episodes curated somewhere, on a website or a page somewhere?
I do not have a website. I just have the Libsyn account where I upload all the audio. So it's classicalidea.podcast.libsyn.com.
Gotcha. Okay.
So that's my pod tosser that throws all the episodes out to Spotify and iTunes and stuff. But I'm trying to think about a way that I can compile the best of Zen episode. The best of Judaism episode, you know what I mean? Pull my favorite 4-minute segments and put them all into the best of episodes.
That would be really awesome.
Yeah, it's just a really hard project because there's so many of them at this time.
Well, and then you have to go back and listen to each episode.
It might be like a when I'm totally done with the show. Like I'll do like some compilation episodes to be like, hey, the show's over, etc. But these are my best ofs, and when you hear a clip that you really like, here's the episode number in the catalog, kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, I would encourage anybody listening to this to just go first and foremost, go subscribe to the show and just start somewhere, because I promise you, if you have any interests in culture, religion, history, you're going to find something that's going to resonate with you. That's my opinion. There's enough content in there.
Yeah, and right now I'm going really, really slow right now because I have these massive work projects that I'm working on right now. So I'm being very, very gentle in my pacing at the moment. I'm only doing about 2 per month at the moment. I used to do 6 per month, and so now I'm slowing down and I'm just kind of relaxing, and I'm going to let 2020 just kind of ride with about 2 or 3 episodes a month. So it's a very relaxed pace right now compared to what I used to do, but I want the show to survive, so I can do less episodes or I can stop the show altogether, and I'm choosing to do less because I might ramp back up again in the future,
Yeah. So I have one, before we jump into the last part of the show, I have one question. This may be a big question.
Sure. Man.
But why do you think, and maybe you don't think this, I don't know, I didn't ask you if you thought this or not, but do you think studying religion is valuable? And I mean, not just one religion, but all religions, the way you're putting it out there. Why do you think that's valuable for people in America?
Well, I mean, the United States is diversifying at such a rapid pace. And if you follow politics and culture in the United States at all, you know that people are freaked out by things that happen at a rapid rate of change. So, and then what that does is when you get freaked out, you get scared. And so I am not scared of rapid rates of change with regards to religion and culture. And I really can't articulate why, but I'm just not, maybe because I'm not a super religious person. And I don't, desire any sort of cultural hegemony over anybody else. So I'm not particularly nervous. I think that the diversity of the United States is extremely interesting instead of scary. And so to me, whenever I learn new things about religion, one of the things I love to do is ask people who practice those religions, is that actually accurate? Is that how you see it? And then what happens is I start to see the internal diversity of particular religions. So if I read something in a book and then I ask 4 or 5 different people from that religion, do you believe XYZ that I just read in this book? Maybe one person will be like, oh, yeah, totally. And then one person will be like, kind of, but it's actually more like this for me. And then one person will be like, no, I don't think that at all. So I am always constantly seeking to find the internal diversity within different religions because I hear people all the time say all Muslims believe X or all Jews believe Y. And I'm just like, or all Christians believe Z. And I'm like, oh, gosh, that is so boring and dull because it's so not true. I like to see the tapestry within a religion instead of seeing somebody like on the news say all so-and-sos believe such. Yeah. And so like I'm constantly looking for the tapestry within a religion. And I think that if everybody else looked for the tapestry within religion as well, and asked questions to people who actually practice those religions instead of being like, all people believe this and that, that we would make so many strides as a country, just like almost immediately. Like I feel like that would just be so powerful if we all were working from a state of suspicion and instead move to a state of curiosity and internal diversity awareness.
Yeah, you sound like you're almost a servant to the mystery, like that.
Oh, totally.
That's what I love. I mean, you're like, look, I like like the not knowing. That's a very comfortable place, is to leave an element of mystery. I've talked to a few people before about that. I said, when I try to describe whatever I practice, which I don't even know what I call that anymore, which is kind of a mystery, but I have this walking stick and it has a red ribbon and a yellow silk ribbon on it. And I was telling a buddy of mine one day, I said, I would honestly sum up, I guess, what I practice with those ribbons. I said, the red ribbon holds passion for me. I think of passion and really lively things, engaging the world with both hands with your shoes off. And then the yellow ribbon is sort of the softer side. It's the joy of life. It's happiness and laughter and all the beautiful things. But there's a third ribbon. And he said, well, what color is that one? I said, well, that ribbon is the mystery. I don't know what color it is. And when the wind blows, I always have to remember that between those two silos that I sort of operate in, there's this mystery that I can't see. And it's okay because it's different as my life evolves. That's always there. There's always that element.
I like your ribbon statement. I have a sort of another one that I use called about a rowboat. So imagine you're on a rowboat and you go out onto the middle of a lake with your two clunky rowboat paddles, and you're looking at the mountains in the distance and the sky above you and the trees like on the side of it, on the hill. And so you can see all this stuff, and there's certain things that are very, very clear, and there are certain things that are very, very far away, and there are certain things that you can't see at all because you can't see under the water. So, like, to me, it's like I'm rowing on top of this water, and I feel like I can know certain things around me, like for pretty sure, but I can't know anything that's under the water unless I put on some scuba gear and I dive into the lake. And so, like, that to me is like, I feel like I'm always rowing around on a rowboat, and I'm just like, and then I like to try and put on some scuba gear every now and then and go down, because every time you go down in the scuba gear, you're going to find something different.
Yeah, and I like that a lot. It's well, there you go. You are you're back in Dao De Ching territory right there. People being concerned with the surface and not the depths.
Yeah, and I don't know anything. You know what I mean? I'm just a guy. And like, I can't believe people actually even listen to my show, because I'm just like a dude from the Midwest. I live in New York now, but like in Buffalo. But I'm just like a guy, and I had a classroom, and now I have an electronic classroom, and I like asking some questions. But I'm just a dude, I don't have any kind of like name recognition. I don't have any sponsors. I don't have any money. I don't have any power or fame. And I just do this because it's just a fun hobby for me.
God, we have some camaraderie here, because I say something I end so many of my little rants about certain things, I would call them, or my little, pulpits I stand on. And I always end with, but what do I know? I'm just some guy. I mean, exactly. Don't listen to me, because I'm just some guy. I don't know anything. I mean, I'm just trying to figure it out just like you. I mean, even if I had some kind of pedigree, it wouldn't matter, because I'm still just a person who's trying to find their way.
Yeah, and like the whole thing is like about this show, like this whole conversation, like I just like have listed off a whole bunch of things that I like. And anybody who listens to this, like, you can go find and see if you like it too. And if you don't, who cares?
That's true. It's absolutely true. Just put it out there. That's great advice, actually.
Well, somebody, like I said, I talked about how much I love Haruki Murakami earlier, and somebody might pick up a Haruki Murakami book and like be like, "This is total trash," and be like, "Okay, throw it away." Who cares?
Right. That's and isn't that great? Right?
Yep,
I mean,
so.
Things would be so much better if we could take that attitude. Everything doesn't need to be placed in this precious glass container on this fickle shelf, just wobbling on the edge,
Yeah, and like students in the past have always asked me, "Wow, why are we reading this and that?" And I'm always like, "Well, is your life worse because we read it? Like, is your life worse because you read Othello or Gilgamesh?" And they're always like, I'm like, is your life worse? Really? For real? Because we read this like 80-page book. Is your life worse? And they're like, no. And I'm like, okay, there you go. Like, that's all you need is like a little bit of a sense of wonder and realizing that your life isn't worse after you've tried out something new, because maybe you'll love it. Maybe you'll hate it. Maybe you'll be totally mediocre and meh about it.
Sure.
But hey, you know what I mean? It's just a day of life with a new experience, and there you go.
Well, the great gift of a show like yours, and it brings me back to that statement about you've created a communion table, is, when you're communing with people, it's conversation. It's things that you can have dialogue about and get to know each other. You're providing such a robust wealth of information that people can really congregate around. I mean, I feel like I have more to talk about because of a show like yours. When I do engage with other people at that, hypothetical communion table, when we begin talking, it's created these caverns of information that I didn't have to draw on before, and so now when we dialogue, it may connect with them, just anything like that. So, I mean, it just creates a richness.
Absolutely. And I've talked about the show, I actually went back the other day and listened to a couple episodes. I listened to episode 40 with a former Rinzai Zen priest named Shozan Jack Hobner, and I listened to the whole thing the other day, and I learned so many new things because I have totally forgotten everything that we said in that conversation, and I was laughing hysterically because I was like, I can't believe I'm listening to my own voice, and I don't remember any of this because I do remember that I interviewed him at 4:30 in the morning.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm like, oh yeah, I interviewed him at 4:30 in the morning because he's in Austria. And it was just so funny because I was just deliriously tired, and it is hysterical conversation, and I don't even remember it. So I went back and I learned from my own show where I just remembered something that happened years ago.
Do you ever find that you're whatever you happen to be reading, which I know that you said you're kind of reading pieces right now, and I've been in that stage before too, but do you ever find that when you're really invested in something, whatever it may be, that for that time period it takes you to read it, that the world looks like what you're reading?
Oh yeah, Lincoln in the Bardo, straight up. I was the first book that springs to mind is George Saunders' Lincoln in the Bardo, and that to me is whenever I think about that, I just think about parenting. Mm-hmm. Abraham Lincoln and Willie Lincoln, you know what I mean? And I think about my own kid, and I'm like, I have to go to get her from school early today because I'm going to lose it.
Yeah.
So that totally happens to me. I react viscerally in certain moments to books where I have to change the schedule of my entire day because something will just overpower me, and I will just be at a loss until I handle what I need to do.
I've been kind of in this Thomas Merton world for the last few years, and he's got so much work, and it seems like just when I think I'm getting a handle on it, a new collection of letters comes out, and he has... this is the truth. I don't know if I would even call it I've brainwashed myself, to be honest. I've read so much now that I feel like I'm looking through his eyes, which I know that's not the truth, but it's I'll read a Merton book and then I'll pepper other things in there, but then I'm back in Merton again, and I don't know what's happened, but it definitely has reframed me a little bit.
Can I request a guest for you to interview on your show?
Oh, yes, please.
All right, so check this out. Merton is sort of like a blind spot of mine, but there is a guy who I had on my show to talk about the mystic G.I. Gurdjieff.
Okay.
And so there's this guy named Dr. Roger Lipsey who I had on my show to talk about Gurdjieff, who is this fascinating figure in European mysticism. And Lipsey is the biographer of Gurdjieff, but he's also a Merton biographer.
Really?
Yep. And so Shambhala Publications has a Merton biography by Roger Lipsey that I would love to hear you talk to Lipsey about Merton on your show.
Oh, man, I'll seek him out because that would be wonderful. That would be one of those things for me, where I'll go, oh, my gosh, I couldn't believe I'm having this conversation, on the show,
Yeah, and I posed the idea of talking to Roger Lipsey about Merton on my show, but I am so unversed in Merton that I feel like I just wasn't really in the zone to do it. But since you are currently totally immersed in Merton, you should get his Merton biography on Shambhala.
I will check it out.
And I mean, you should totally just write to Shambhala and say, I want to do an episode with Roger Lipsey about Merton. and can you help me schedule it? And they'll probably say, yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because I'm shocked that there's not more conversations about him. I scour the podcast realm looking for conversations, and there's people that touch on him. In fact, one of my guests, Susan Stabile, she was a Tibetan Buddhist nun, but was raised Catholic, and then she left Buddhism after 10 or 15 years, and then came back to Catholicism, and now she does these retreats. But she sort of reworked all her meditation practices from the Tibetan practices for her Catholic retreats. And she had a whole episode of one of her lectures was about Merton, which was kind of how I found her, actually. I was like, wow, this is a great conversation about Merton. Land on her book. She's in, this sort of hybrid Tibetan Catholicism situation. And I was like, boy, the world is just a wonderful place. How you can just follow these little, you said that about a tapestry. I mean, you can just pull a string on these big tapestries within any religion and find all this wonder on just one thread.
I agree. I totally agree. I couldn't say it any better myself.
So look, this is the last part of the show.
Okay.
This I don't know if you can see it, but this is the fish bowl. Do you able to see me?
I do not see you.
Okay, well, I'm holding up a fish bowl, and it's covered in all kinds of stickers. But there's probably about 400 questions in this bowl.
Oh, God.
So every guest who's come on this show has drawn 3 questions. We don't know what they are.
Ooh, I like this. This is cool.
Yeah, it's fun, man. You never know what you're going to get. So when I do a call-in guest, I usually draw it for them. So I'm going to draw 3 random questions out of here.
Okay. I'm going to imagine I'm diving in myself. I'm doing that in my video.
Okay, let's see. All right, that's a good question, man. All right, let's just start with the first one. Would you ever steal to provide for your family?
Yes.
Absolutely?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If I had to, absolutely. And, I mean, I know that the risk would be going to jail possibly, but I might get away with it. And I know that that's maybe a problematic answer. These ethical questions always have so many problems. But I mean, I would do everything I could to not, like, I would, go up and down my street and I would say, like, can I shovel your driveway for $10? Seriously, like I would do little tiny stuff to avoid it, and I would get as far as I could with not stealing. But if it came down to it, and I mean, I would totally steal ramen noodles, Yeah.
So that's a good answer.
I don't know. Like, I know that I would do what I could to not, but I also know that I would, basically in a heartbeat. Especially if it was like, if there's like a billions and billions of dollars conglomerate corporation that, I would choose wisely who I was stealing from, essentially.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. The most ethical way you could.
Yeah, like am I gonna go and steal from like the independently owned grocery store down the street that, like, really every purchase matters? I would do my best to not do that. But if I had to, if I had to go through a drive-through at McDonald's and I had to peel out and burn rubber with that free Happy Meal, I would do it.
I think I am in alignment with everything you said. I would do the same thing. There's no doubt about it. I could try to say I wouldn't, but I know I would. I mean, when it comes to your family, it's just a whole different situation.
Yeah, and I have a 6-year-old, man. Like, I would do anything for the 6-year-old.
Now, I like this question. Nobody's ever drawn this question before.
All right, bring it on.
Who is the very first friend you ever remember making, and how old were you?
Oh, my gosh. Okay, so I'm friends with them on Facebook.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Now. And so my very earliest friend was my kindergarten best friend. This is like one that I truly remember. And her name is Trisha, and she lives in Chicago, and we're friends on Facebook. And she was great buddies with me in kindergarten, not beyond kindergarten, because after kindergarten we went to separate elementary schools. But even to this day, every now and then we'll pop onto each other's Facebook feed and be like, "Hey, what's up?" So that's my answer.
That's a good answer, man. I'm listening to you talk about it, so I even know the answer to this. I was such a loner as a kid. You know, when I was young, I stayed at my grandma's house a lot, and I was by myself. I think I was the only kid in the family. I mean, I have siblings and cousins and all that now, but when I was little, yeah, I was by myself a lot with, you know, my grandmother and my grandfather's house. So, you know, I guess I would have to say it would probably be like a group of people. I can't really remember who my very first best friend is. I wish I could, though. That would be a good thing to have in my memory bank.
You need to do some research. Ask anybody that remembers you from when you were a kid.
Yeah, like who would that be? Yeah, that's interesting, man. I'm glad you have that relationship still. That's awesome. It's a treasure. Let's see. Last question. Okay. What do you think gets better with age?
Ooh. Oh, man. Not my back or my knee. Let's see. Better with age. Honestly, I think virtually everything.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like all the things that I've said about like my philosophy of life. Like, I'm never bored. You know what I mean? I'm just never bored. And so like things like watching, like, so Buffalo has the most amazing sunsets ever. I appreciate them every day. I learn to cook something new as often as I can. I've been getting back into appreciating music and finding new bands.
Yeah.
Like, so, I mean, I truly think that almost anything can get better with age if you are saying, I want my life to get better as I age.
Yeah. There you go.
Do you know what
yeah.
I mean?
No, I do. Yeah.
That's a super hard question to answer because, like, I'm not really sure that I have like a certain one thing. Because we know all the things that get worse as you age. I mean, I have no hair. I had back surgery. Like my you know, paying bills is a real drag. But you know, all the little things in life like can get better as you age if you are purposely saying, I want things to get better as I age.
Yeah. No, I agree. That's a good way to look at it. You can say things have gotten worse. They've just changed. I mean, I have this little black strip of paper taped to my computer monitor in my office, and it says change is the law. And it's been at every place I've ever worked. There's some comedy in that for me because you get a job and you think this is going to be it. I've made it. I've got this job. Man. You know, I finally made it. And then, you know, however many years pass, you've taken a new career or path, you're at a new office, whatever. I've always brought that little strip of paper with me, and it's all old and worn, but it does remind me change is the law. Change is going to happen again. It's not bad.
Absolutely.
You know?
I totally agree. So that's a hard question to answer, but it's also kind of a fun one.
Yeah, it is. So there's one last question, man, and it's not in the fish bowl.
Okay.
And then you said you can't see me, right?
I cannot see you.
Okay, I don't know why my camera didn't turn on.
I'm not really sure either, but whatever. It is what it is.
Well, I can see you, so I'm going to pretend like you can see me. There's a bright yellow coffee mug that we send to all the guests who've been on the show. And
sweet.
On the back side, there's a question. It says, did anything good happen today?
Today, like exactly today.
Today.
Well, I'm writing a religious studies online class right now for high school students, and I found some absolutely impeccable resources for my Taoism lesson. So I am sort of on cloud 9 because I feel like I wrote something that will be very, very powerful for young people who take my online class.
Oh, wow, man. That's really awesome.
Yep. So I'm on like sort of like a little professional high today because I feel really good about a few things that I found for a lesson that I'm writing. That's
exciting. Well, that's what you do. Isn't that exciting when what you do for a living invigorates you?
Anything that I write for the classes that I write, I mean, it's printed words on the page. And what are printed words on the page? Art. And what is art? Something that exists now that didn't exist before.
Yeah, man. That is a treasure whenever you can do that. It really is. You know, I see so many people that I try to be grateful when I can, and I can be ungrateful. I can be ungrateful all the time. I mean, but when I see people who are doing things that make them very, very unhappy, sometimes I go, oh, my little unhappiness is just a matter of perspective. I just need to reframe my view, because the things that I do have allowed me to do this, allowed me to have conversations with people like you. I mean, that's a treasure. That's not something that I would have had in my life had I not taken the career path I'd taken,
Well, and I have no doubt that sometime our paths will cross, and you and I will be able to, go out to eat at your favorite lunch place.
Yeah, that sounds like a great thing to look forward to.
I agree. And my wife is a marathon runner, and she runs marathons, and she wants to run marathons in all 50 states. And she has not done Louisiana yet. So if you have a marathon, if you have a marathon suggestion in Louisiana.
Well, I've had guests on the show who do that, and I can definitely get you some links to stuff like that and let her start making a plan.
Spectacular. That sounds awesome.
So look, for the people listening, I'll put links in the show notes, but just anything you want to share with them about your show and how to connect with you, or how you prefer that to happen.
The thing is about my show is that if you reach out to me and you want to know where you should start, I will totally converse with you. So if you follow me on Twitter, it's at classical_ideas, or you can write to me on Facebook at Facebook.com/classical ideas podcast. I am, super excited to talk to anybody who wants to talk about the show. Just let me know what I can do to tailor your listening experience, and I will be as helpful as I possibly can in, helping you enjoy the show and find something that interests you.
Well, Greg, thank you so much for agreeing to do this and for taking the time to do it, honestly. I know you got a lot going on, but as a fan of the show, it's been just sort of surreal to get to talk to you in person, sort of in person.
It is absolutely my pleasure. And I'm happy that you invited me. And this has been such a wild week. I was just in Brazil, which we didn't even talk about.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about that. That's right.
But it's been madness. So I am really just doing my best to have a cool life and do things that are interesting and don't bore me. And so to get to talk about it with you today has been just a real pleasure as well.
All right, friends. So check him out. Greg Soden, Classical Ideas Podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
Classical Ideas is produced by me, Greg Soden. Music on Classical Ideas is composed and performed by Derek Strybig. You can find his music at www.wearewarmmusic.com. If you like this show, please rate it on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can email me at classicalideas@outlook.com, or find me on Patreon at patreon.com/classicalideaspodcast. Thanks so much for listening.